Tuning in to another episode of the Self-Defense Show. Today we got probably one of the most important and biggest topics when it comes to self-defense, when it comes to violence, which is fear. And I could talk about it for hours, but we only have 30 minutes. So it's going to be more of an open discussion where I'm going to be taking questions and answers, as well as sharing my own personal experience, my relationship to fear through my years of being a little kid, being bullied, picked on, learning martial arts, working in clubs, then being faced with real violence, real situations, everything that happens before, during, and after a violent attack or a fight. So we're going to be covering all of those topics for the next 30 minutes. But before we start, guys, make sure to check out my website, nickdrossos.com. I have brand new fight analysis, access to my hero program, my training program, larger attack or women's self-defense, as well as if you want to do some one-on-one training with me, check out nickdrossos.com, as well as a little shout out to my host, Vincent MMA, who's going to be the moderator of this next 30-minute live, and he's helping me out. He's building the show with me weekly, so check out Vincent MMA, and let's get started, guys. Markin, what's going on? So probably one of the first things, do you have any ideas on to keep balance or balance exercise? Guys, so the rules are you got to stick to the topic. Today's topic is about fear management, fear, stress management, how to manage that moment when you're faced with an attacker or you're about to fight and you feel your heart rate go up and you might get to a point where you freeze. You panic, you get completely overwhelmed, and worst is you get into your head. I've always said, now I'm going to talk about my personal experience, but before we start, I'm going to kind of break it down. I took some notes. First thing I would suggest, anybody who's into the self-defense training, Krav Maga, anybody who's wants to understand violence, this is the book you need to pick up and read, right? It's an old book. It's called The Gift of Fear by Gavin DeBecker. I think it's like 20 or 30 years old. 20 years old, and I remember it was one of the first books I read to understand a little bit more about fear. And it served me many times working in the clubs and the bars because, again, it's one thing fighting in the ring. It's one thing doing scenarios and training. It's another to actually be faced in the street with multiple attackers, weapons, being faced in real situations where you do not know or have any idea of what the outcome will be. And that's a little bit where fear is. And one of the acronyms of fear in this book is false evidence appearing real. So what does that mean? False evidence appearing real means it hasn't happened, but you've created a story in your head. So before the fight, you're faced with your attacker, you're talking to him, he's maybe mouthing off, and you know there's a point where your intuition or your instinct is going to tell you, holy shit, this is not a drill. This is not a scenario. This is real. My life is in danger. This person is maybe reaching for a weapon. You can't see his hands. Your heart rate goes up. You start feeling this emotion. Everything starts to like overwhelm your body. And you have that adrenaline factor, right? So a lot of people mistaken adrenaline for fear. That adrenaline is what you need that's going to help you survive, right? So unlike sparring in the ring, and I've experienced both, your adrenaline is going to kick in and it's going to last maybe 30 seconds to a minute and a half where you're going to be able to go full speed and then it's going to crash. But throughout that minute, you'll be able to get punched, stabbed, maybe even shot. I know a bouncer who got shot and still managed to fight and still managed to survive and drive himself to the hospital. That's because of adrenaline. Now, where fear comes in is, and again, I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience and my years of training, you know, being a kid, being picked on and bullied. Obviously, I was afraid. I was afraid of being picked. I was afraid of being bullied. I was afraid of being beaten, jumped, stabbed. I was afraid of everything that could happen. However, there was some truth to it because it happened growing up, but there was also much of it that was a story that I created in my head. Right? So you need to separate real fear and creative, or the story in your head. How do you do those? Again, I'll run you through a scenario that would happen to me working at the club. I'm standing in front of the club, I'm talking to the guy, and here was the first thing, is that we think that fear is bad for us. Every time I felt afraid, one, it was a signal. It was my survival signal that told me it's not a drill. This is not a training. If I'm afraid, it means it's real. That's the first thing. The second thing that fear would do, the second thing, right, when you're faced with that is you got to get out of your head. Fear is not the biggest enemy. Doubt is. The moment you're faced with an attacker and you start doubting yourself, oh man, right? Because the doubt, basically it's you against your attacker, but you against you. So that doubt, once you get into your head, you're going to start creating a story. Holy shit, he's so much bigger. I'll never take him. I'm not trained enough. I'm not good enough. Man, there are too many. So you start creating and stacking these ideas that are maybe somewhat based on some truth, but the story that you start building off it is completely hasn't happened yet. And that's the worst part. So when you get into your head and you start building those stories, stacking that story one after another and making it bigger and nothing's happened yet, now that's when all of that fear becomes counterproductive to you being ready to fight. And the doubt will create some hesitation. The hesitation will create for you to anticipate. You're not going to be in the present moment because you're going to be in your head. And I tell this to people, when you're in a violent confrontation, that the scariest part of a fight or an attack is not during. It's those seconds prior. Those seconds are the ones that will make or break your mindset. Meaning, if you're going to get into your head and beat yourself and create stories and scenarios of everything's going to happen, and it travels, that story builds up so fast in your head that you're faced with your attacker and you're talking to him, and you maybe have already you're going to be in the hospital tonight sucking out of a straw. That happens, guess what? The minute that first strike is thrown from either or, you're going to fold. So what do you need to do? I tell people one of the first things when it comes to fear, what I try to do, one, you got to breathe. You got to unblock, keep the blood and everything flowing. Two, this is the important one. You got to stay in the present moment. Get out of your head. It is not the time for you to question your skills, for you to create a story, for you to escape what is actually happening right now. And I always tell people, the minute you get into your head, shit's still happening. And you need to be clear. You need to clear your mind and be focused on your attacker. Is he shifting his weight? Is he moving around? Is he getting a weapon? Is his friends coming around? Is he trying to set up that strike? If you get into your head, guess what? You're missing all those cues. So this is why I do a lot of training, in stress training, where you train in high adrenaline, right? Where you're going to max out your heart rate and then do a scenario. Max out your heart rate and have to execute 2 or 3 things at the same time while you're fighting, while you're defending in a scenario. So you're not going to short circuit, and you're going to be able to control your heart rate, your breath, get out of your head, be able to talk and strike and move and be able to do many things at the same time, right? So you need to train in that high stress situation. As well, another way to overcome fear is to train and to exercise. Let's say you're afraid of being attacked with a knife. Do more knife training. Do more knife scenarios. Learn everything there is you need to know about that specific attack. The more you know, the less chances you're going to have of panicking, freezing, and allowing that fear to take over. Because fear is not a bad thing. Like I said, to me, When I'm afraid, it's when I fight best. When I'm afraid, I'm a savage because my life is at danger. So you need to trust yourself that whatever happens in that moment, take out the fear, take out everything. And you have to just believe and trust in what you've trained or what you trained to do and give it everything you have. Fight with everything you have. Because again, and here's the thing, a lot of people hate being afraid, and I'm one of these people. I hate being afraid. I hate that feeling. But it's inevitable. It's almost impossible for you not to be afraid. Why? Because what are we really afraid of? Let's really think about it. When you're faced with an attacker and you know that, all right, this is going down. You know that you're going to have to fight. What are you really afraid of? The scariest part is you don't know the outcome of a fight. You don't know if they're going to jump you, if he's going to stab you. You don't have a certain frame of what will happen in that fight. Now, if you look at it fighting in the cage, you have a certain frame that you know, worst case scenario, you're going to get knocked out. Worst case scenario, you're going to get knocked out, go to the hospital, but you're not actually fearing for your life. You're not actually fearing that you might die. It could happen. Again, the chances are a lot more slim than in the street. But that frame allows you to have a certain amount of not, I don't want to say comfort, of control of what can happen, worst case scenario. And I always play that worst case scenario in everything I do in my life. So I go worst case scenario to get to the end of what I'm actually most afraid of, and then say, okay, it's the worst case scenario, boom, I'm ready. And fear, when we're looking at fear, you know, when you're looking at violence, I've had people tell me, Nick, I'm afraid to fight. I'm afraid to hit back. I'm afraid that if I strike him, I might end up in prison. So his real fear is going to prison. I'm afraid to hurt the person. So there's many aspects of fear in the construct of violence from beginning to end. So you need to ask yourself, what am I most afraid of? How can I prepare myself? And part of it is accepting. If you change the meaning and translation of fear to when I'm afraid, it's when I fight best. When I'm afraid, it means it's not a drill. When I'm afraid, it means this is my survival. It's my alarm telling me, Nick, prepare for battle. And one of the lines I saw was in the movie by Alexander the Great. I don't know if it's an actual line, probably not, I don't know. And one of his generals went to Alexander and he said, the men are afraid. And he said, that's good. Men fight better when they fear. Think about it. So if you can change that relationship, that translation, that meaning to fear, you're also going to change how it's going to make you feel in the moment. And that's, again, that's through training, through visualizing exercises if you wanted to, through reading books, or basically whatever it is you need to do to understand. And, you know, like we say, whatever resists persists. So if you're fighting fear, fear will be there. If you just let it go and you're like, shit, it's normal to be afraid. Guess what? You're supposed to be afraid, right? And I spoke to a friend of mine. We did some films together, and he's a fireman. He's a stuntman. And I said, George, when you walk into a fire in a building, I go, are you afraid? He goes, every time. Every time before I walk into that building, I'm afraid. And I go, what are you most afraid of? He goes, because we never know what to expect. When the fire's in there and you go inside, you have no clue what to expect. But we're trained to do this. We do it over and over. And at that moment, you just got to go in and do what you've spent your years of training for, and you don't have time to doubt, to panic, to second guess yourself. Every time you think, you cannot think and fight at the same time. There's a lapse, a split second of lapse. And when you do, right, you become telegraphic to your opponent. So you got to stay focused in the moment. A great line I heard from the Karate Kid. It said, lose to your opponent, but don't lose to fear. And that's it. And again, that fear could be applied to anything in our lives. It could be applied in your relationship. I got divorced. I was afraid. I didn't know what was on the other side once I got divorced. I didn't know what I was going to get. I didn't know what I was going into. It could be fear of starting your own business, right? When I left my job at the hospital, a secure job to open my business, I was afraid. What was going to happen? Was I going to make it? Was I going to make it? Was I going to be able to pay my bills? And believe it or not, when I went in my head and I created that fear story, and it went so big, it went to the point where I was going to be homeless, living in the street, and wouldn't be able to pay my child support. It's scary. But this is where you're actually pushed. This is where you're actually pushed to grow. Where I constructed the story of fear, and I went all the way to the end of me losing my house, being homeless, not being able to pay my child support. My story went that far, and then I told myself, it's the worst case scenario. Okay, good. Now I'm ready. I'm gonna do it. And I do that as a survival mechanism. Maybe it works for some, maybe it doesn't. For me, it works because it takes out the story and the dramatization of what you believe is going to happen. And the fact that I could go all the way to the end, for some reason, it makes me more secure to at least know this is the worst case scenario. And I live with that in all the areas of my life. And guess what? It works. Do you see you doing well? Yo, Nick, glad to see you doing well. What's up, Marlon? When you should fight, when you don't. I find hard to breathe in those anxiety moments. Calm down. Good. So you know what? When you feel, okay, let me go through the questions. My experience dealing with fears, I learned from my Kung Fu teacher, is concentrate on your stomach. That's why I said, guys, focus on your breath. It's very important because once you start focusing on your breath, you start being in the moment, right? So the idea is you got to get out of your head and don't let that story, don't let that negative, because anytime you get in your head, in most scenarios, it's negative. So you want to pull that out, be in the present moment, and learn through your training to focus on what's happening and understand that if you lose one moment of focus in a fight, you're getting hit. And the best example of this is when you fight beginners in the ring, right? What they'll tend to do is they'll try to think and fight. So they'll fight, every time they'll throw a punch, they'll stop a split second and then throw their punch because they're thinking of what they're going to do. And I'll go, bam, and I'll be, stop thinking. It's normal you're doing it at the beginning because you're not trained enough that it comes naturally. You're not confident enough. You're in your head, you're probably afraid and anticipating my next move, which makes you telegraphic and makes you telegraphic and slows you down. So through training, the idea for you is to learn to be in that moment. Again, it's not for nothing. We do stress training, full out stress training where you have to focus. So imagine you got to do 20 burpees, skip 2 minutes, run up and down the stairs, grapple someone, right? Grapple, and you got to answer 4 + 6, 2 + 2 as you're doing it. So I've developed drills to be able to work that awareness and that mind to be able to fight one person, but be aware of where the second one is. If you get into your head, guess what? The fight's lost before it even won. And the worst opponent and the worst attacker is yourself. So you got to train and get that out. Guys, by the way, I have my super chat on. So if you guys want to leave me a super chat, it'd be cool. It'd be a nice donation. If not, it's all good. Do you have any advice on keeping when should you fight and when you don't? So this is a great question. My rule of thumb is the moment that I'm no longer communicating with my attacker. So I'll rewind it. The moment I see your body language set up, angling off, pivoting, looking around, touching your face, clenching your fists, reaching for a weapon, trying to break range in, out, or around. Those are all signs that he's preparing. And generally speaking, from experience in working in clubs, your attacker will make this intention through body before language because he needs to find a way to get close, position himself. Then there's verbal. What I tell people, the moment I can no longer diffuse, de-escalate, communicate, when he's just repeating, when he's not listening, when he's building himself up and he's in his head, then I know that he's preparing his body and he's preparing his mind to go preemptive, to either sucker punch me or set up that strike. So what you need to do, you need to, as you're talking to your attacker and your hands are up, there's a reason why I teach to bring up your hands, to keep moving, to create angles, to talk to your attacker, because you want to set up that first preemptive strike. The idea is, when it comes to self-defense, guys, it's, like in Cobra Kai, strike first and strike hard. The no mercy, I don't agree with that, right? And that means that when I've struck the person and I created distance or an opportunity to run, I'm out. Again, take it from someone who worked as a bouncer in clubs for many years. I've seen people get stabbed. I've seen people get shot. I've seen it all. And it's not pretty. There's nothing cool. There's nothing heroic. There's nothing, to glorify about seeing the violence that I've seen working in clubs. And it's scary. And here's the other thing. The more you experience violence to that level, the more afraid, quote unquote, the more afraid you are, the more I know what an outcome of a street fight looks like, because I've seen it all, or I've seen most of it. So I know that if I get attacked in the street, I've seen the worst and the ugly. Guess what? What I've used that experience to fuel me to train harder, to fight harder, to understand that in the street, I'm going to do whatever it takes to survive. And the same thing, right? I always tell people, what do you fill your gas tank with? What is your gas tank? What do you fill it with? Use fear as fuel. Use fear as power. Use fear as a source of, it's not a drill, it's not an exercise, this is real, and when I'm afraid, I'm a savage. When I'm afraid, I fight better, I fight stronger. And it's almost like that moment, and I played basketball for many years, I was the best under pressure. When I'm under pressure, it's when I'm the best. I don't know why. Because I got used to. Because my life, most of my life, I've had to survive under pressure. So I got good under pressure. I got good in those stressful moments when they count. It's like, pass me the ball, I got it. Same thing when I'm either sparring or when I'm in the street. When under pressure is when I do best. And you also have to train and believe in yourself that when shit hits the fan and your life is in danger, you got to believe in yourself. And what happens is, and this is from experience, everything is going to shut down. This is why the hardest part of a fight or an attack is those 2-3 seconds prior to that strike. Once that happens, if you notice, people just start fighting. You're either fighting back or giving up. But that happens before the actual attack. So a person will either double over and take a beating, or he's gonna fight. But once he's in that fight, you're no longer thinking of fear. You're fighting for survival. So I always say, use that fear to fight better. Use that fear as an alarm signal that this is not a drill and not an exercise. You're gonna do whatever it takes. Fill up your tank with fear, but use it to be savage and to fight with everything you have. And that goes for anything in your life, right? So if you need to break down fear in many levels to find out what is the root, because there's a root of fear, right? What are you actually afraid of? I'm afraid to get punched. Why? What's going to happen if you get punched? Well, I'm going to break it. I don't want to break my teeth. What happens if you break your teeth? I'm going to have to go to the dentist and it's going to cost me money. And what happens if you go to the dentist, cost you money? My parents don't have money. They can't. So if you notice, you start layering it and you're going to get to the real source, which is more than just, I'm afraid to fight or I'm afraid to hit. There's a story underlying and you need to break it down, get to that root and find a way to accept it and accept it. Tell yourself it's not real. This is just an idea. It's created, but it could be real. It could happen. And if it does, it's okay. I say that a lot and it's okay. Right? So the hardest part of fight is accepting that you won't live. Talking about, absolutely. You're absolutely right, guys. And the difference is this. And I know working in clubs. I know I trained, I fought in the ring. I did scenarios, I did sparring. And working in the club was the biggest eye-opener of understanding violence, understanding human behavior, understanding everything that happens prior, before, and after. There's an after effect to it too. I remember when I saw that kid, he got stabbed. He died in front of me. And I remember for a week, I couldn't sleep. For 1 week, every time I closed my eyes, I saw this kid's face. Until today, I still remember it. There was a sort of, like, this is real. This actually happens. It could happen to me. When I used to train in the clubs, I used to tell myself, you know what was my motivation for training? This week, somebody's gonna try to stab me. Guess what? If I became so proficient in knife defense, because I always said to myself, this weekend, I'm going to get attacked. This weekend might be the weekend I'm going to be faced with a knife. I got to be prepared. So that was my motivation. That was what disciplined me to train. Was it made up? No, it's real. It could happen. It's not like, I hate snakes. I hate snakes. It's not like I was afraid I'm going to go to work at the club and somebody's going to, a snake's going to show up and bite me. That would be a false, completely irrational belief and fear. But the fear I had was based on some truth and some reality. You also need to break those up. So in your mind, is it real or isn't it real? How do I prepare for what I fear most? Guess what? It's training. Again, I go back. There's a reason why in school they do fire drills for kids. Why? If they turn out the fire drill and the kids never trained, they'd start panicking, freaking out. They'd be afraid. They'd be anxiety. They wouldn't know to run, hide, jump. But they do these drills. So when they hear that bell, they know how to react, what to do. They're trained. It's the same thing. You need to apply that same principle in your training and in your life. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. What I suggest to all of you guys, check out The Gift of Fear. All right, it's an exceptional book. Okay, as well as if you want to learn more self-defense, guys, visit my website, nickdrossos.com. I have a brand new training camp. A training camp, private Facebook group, private community and chat where you guys could talk to me. All my new content is all going to be up there in my training camp. So click the link in the comment box. Go check it out. I want to thank you guys for watching. Stay safe and stand strong.